welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. I feel like there's often a lot of confusion, or at least like a lack of distinction between wallets and agents. They typically, people bucket them together as one or the other, but they're clearly two different things. They clearly have dependencies on each other. But I feel like maybe we need to start separating them a little bit more because each of them have their own exciting roadmaps. And I know on the agent side of things, you have and you continue to put a lot of thought into it. And so I'd be interested from your perspective, kind of if we could start by defining both of them and then start defining some of the key differences between them and then perhaps getting into the relationship.
Yeah, because I don't think you can you can't separate them, so we have to talk about their relationship. And I'll just clarify these two terms, wallet and agent, in the larger context of SSI, self-sovereign identity, decentralized trust infrastructure. They have many meanings in other places, especially the term agent. It's used throughout computing, and people talk about your browser as a user agent, your email client as a user agent. So agent, even before we get into mobile agents and all the other kinds of agents, intelligent agents, autonomous agents, all that stuff out there. And then, by the way, wallet's been a pretty overloaded term for a long time too. But if you put them both in the context that we're talking about here, I think it becomes a lot more concrete. And the one thing I'll say is in the industry, as I think well, Mathieu, some companies and some people use the term wallet to mean both, right? You have a mobile wallet and it does all these things, right? And that's the name of the app and it's the name of the function. And they don't separate out or separately consider the term agent. I don't currently know of any company, and it's possible Avast may end up being Avast Norton that were now merged, will be the first to really put the emphasis on agent and either not mention wallet or put wallet down, behind the scenes. So I'm just, from a terminology standpoint, clarifying that the two terms are used and it's very nebulous what people mean. So I will come forth and say, I'll parrot pretty much what we put in the self-sovereign identity book, which is, I draw the distinction that the wallet is very similar to a real world leather wallet. It is the place that it's a function typically rooted in the hardware of the device for storing cryptographic keys and other sensitive cryptographic material that's needed to perform a bunch of operations under the control of the owner of the wallet. I'm going to use that term. We can talk about users and everything else, but just the way we own wallets in the real world, we literally own a piece of leather and we control what happens to the things that go in and out of it. I think that's an accurate way to think about that term as it applies in this branch of computing and decentralized identity infrastructure. So if that's your definition of the wallet, then it's fairly easy then to say, oh, well, what is the agent? The agent is the software that uses the wallet to perform actions on behalf of the owner. And again, if you go back to the real world analogy, a wallet is a piece of leather with a bunch of cards inside of it. Doesn't do anything on its own, right? The agent is the person that owns the wallet and decides what goes in and what goes out and when to do that, and maintains the protection and security of that piece of leather and the plastic inside of it. And so when you're dealing with a computational wallet, on a device, then you need a piece of software that knows how to talk to that wallet that will do so securely on behalf of the user or the owner, and and then performs functions that require the wallet. So now that gets into you know, some people are using the term identity agent or you know, an SSI agent. They're trying to qualify this new kind of agent that performs functions that require access to and operations that use the wallet, and therefore can do a bunch of things that you know, other apps that don't have access to the wallet or don't have a wallet function can't do. And as soon as you start going down that road, the other analogy you could use there is if the wallet is like the hard disk of the computer, where you're going to actually store and hold things in a computer, then the agent is like the operating system, and that actually is going to, you know, perform the functions of taking things in and out, you know, writing a file, reading a file, supporting applications. But then you've got the whole world of applications. What do you do with that hard disk? Well, the same thing is true in, you know, with the agent that works with a digital wallet. There are all kinds of things it can now perform because it has access to that underlying the cryptographic material and operations, and can speak to others. So that's sort of a long answer, but I think if we're going to talk about the different functions of the wallet and the agent, we gotta set those ground rules first.
I was thinking as you were describing this, like, what is the real world equivalent or the physical world equivalent to agents? And you kind of said it's you in as a person in the real world. You're the one that picks your wallet out. You're the one that decides what to share with who. As more and more things move digital, there's more and more types of interactions that you could have. There's also a higher frequency of transactions or interactions I could have, because I'm no longer limited to just going in person somewhere. It's almost like if I have a twin, I could make them show up to class for me. But it's the same type of thing, that I can now have multiple things happening on my behalf at once. What becomes interesting as well is, we had talked about this previously, is just the whole idea of personas as well, right? And I really think that's the way that things are going with agents, is that, you know, and we see this with some of the biggest companies in the world, that they're starting to do stuff like this, allowing you to really create, call it personas, or just different categories around your preferences. And so, like, if anyone listening has an iPhone, I like to refer to, and it's been actually great for me, using this focus feature that they have in settings. And you could have different settings for your personal life, or if you're in work or whatever, based on what types of interactions you want to have or what you want to see and not see. So I really see agents moving in that same direction, where it's going to be a lot more intelligence around your preferences, but it's just, I guess, the equivalent of you picking your own preferences in the physical world, but this is just working on your behalf now in the digital world.
I agree completely. I mean, I think one of the most important things that what you're referring to there on your iPhone is the intelligence that they're trying to add to an operating system, in that case the phone, to help you, you know, to help it actually adjust to be a more effective tool in your different, and one of those key things is context, right? What context are you working in? Is, you know, is it work? Is it play? Is it sports? Are you traveling? In fact, one of the really powerful things, I have to compliment, I'm also an Apple user, as they're trying to, you know, come up with features, hooks on the latest iPhone. It's the ad they're running where you just see the iPhone, you know, with a bunch of sharded glass around it. It just looks like a really great thing, and then you slowly realize, oh, this is an iPhone in an accident, a car accident. And then it just, the one tagline, your iPhone actually knows when you've been in an accident and can call for help. Now that you have just, you know, now that's an agent operating on your behalf. It's an agent in that case. It just happens, you know, it doesn't need a wallet, it has a wallet, right? But it has you know, it's rooted in the phone, and you trust the phone enough that if sends that kind of a signal, that agent's taking what could be a life-saving step on your behalf. So that's a perfect example where it knows context and it knows something that it actually is going to do automatically, and you want it to do that because you may not be conscious.
You also described the agent being kind of an OS on the wallet, which would kind of look at it as a hard disk. Do you think it's going to be difficult for agent providers, or however we want to, there's all sorts of stuff to keep up with what the best terms are, and it's a tough thing to describe. I think sometimes in this whole space we're in, people just try to bucket everything into one term, and it just never works because it never encompasses everything. So I think as we start seeing more fragmentation in the space, and like smart identity agents start becoming its own category type of thing, it'll be a bit easier to classify these things. But do you see it being difficult for wallet providers that are, if we think of our agent providers, if the agent is the OS, ultimately you're still sitting on the other OS. We're just describing the Apple OS, who perhaps causes some issues or roadblocks for another one sitting on the top. And do you think it's going to be difficult for agent providers on top of an OS like Apple or Android to compete with Apple and Android with the type of context that they're able to pick up and then give you the right set of options that you're looking for?
I'll give you the world's shortest answer. Yes. I think it's a real challenge there, because the deeper we get, the more advanced we get in terms of the technology we're using every day in our digital lives. And you know, I think you know, we all know that just how much, for instance, the smartphone has transformed our daily life. And by that, I don't mean every person in the world. Not everyone has a smartphone, and there's, you know, this it in my opinion has actually made the digital divide much deeper and wider. Hopefully that's something, you know, that we can, and some places in the world are doing things about that. But the smartphone is a tool now that we can carry it with us, that it knows location, that it you know, can you know, be tied to so many other devices that we're using, and you know, and now to smart watches. The more we rely on those digital tools in our lives, the more powerful the position is of the OS vendors, often called the platform providers. And there are all kinds of platform providers, but here we're talking specifically about, you know, device OS platform providers, especially mobile. But you know, in the case of Apple, it's mobile, it's desktop, it's tablet, it's smartwatch, it's all those things. They are an extremely powerful position. And I think when it comes to digital identity and digital trust infrastructure, it is of paramount importance that the power that they have, they not be able to wield that in a way that will be anti-competitive in that market. It's a fundamental reason, for example, that we now have an initiative that the Linux Foundation announced last month, the intent to form the Open Wallet Foundation, so that we can have you know, open source code, you might call it, quote, Linux for digital wallets, a widely used OS that a wallet, you know, call it wallet code, wallet module that can be used, that will have the same access to the operating system, to, you know, secure system functions, a secure enclave on a mobile device, as the platform providers have. And that, you know, the closer we can get to a true level playing field, the better it will be for all of us. I actually believe it's even the best thing for the platform companies, you know, for a number of reasons. But I think we really need that level playing field if we're going to see the full potential of those devices to help us develop and use decentralized digital trust infrastructure.
That's a good point about it being valuable for the OS providers as well, because it kind of imagine it like when Apple decided to open up an app store, or companies like Facebook decide to open up tools for developers to build games and stuff like that. It just continues to add stickiness to the platform altogether. So it's just kind of that next level of allowing developers or these app companies to gain access to more things, which in turn will add more privacy and more benefits to their users, creating downstream even more stickiness to Apple or Google or whoever is the big player of the time.
Yeah, it's important to point out that there are already governments, regulatory jurisdictions around the world that are saying, wait a minute, this is too important. The digital infrastructure is becoming essential from an economic standpoint, from political and even security and standpoint. We have to have open access and open standards for these things that produce a level playing field, and one that the governments can access and use as well as everyone else. And this is one of the reasons, as I know you're well aware, that the EU has started. It's almost 18 months ago now, the European Digital Identity Wallet Initiative, and is funding that to the tune of 26 million euros for a 4-year budget for building an open source code base for European for digital wallets to be used by EU citizens and issued either by EU member states or by their designates or by providers that they certify. I think all those wallets will be certified in the EU, which again also ties back into our earlier point about they're just simply calling them identity wallets, right? They're sort of pulling the agent wallet function together and talking about, oh, it's an identity wallet, and that's the new tool that they will be using because of their infrastructure with the IDAS. And they're not the only ones, of course. Canadian provinces, well as a Canadian, they're also leading the way in that, BC Gov and Ontario and Quebec, and other countries. We've done work at Avast with Bhutan. It wants to put in place an entire SSI-based infrastructure based on digital wallets and issuers, holders, verifiers of digital credentials. So this is really, this is going to become part of our overall global digital infrastructure. And it's really critical that therefore it be something like the internet that's accessible to all.
One of the things, mentioning Europe here, I've been in Europe for a few weeks now, and one of the things that I feel like hasn't necessarily got the same adoption in Canada, but at least Canada has more adoption in this than the US has, is the tap to pay. And it's just incredible here, like the amount of toll routes that I've had to drive through, and you just pull up to the gate, tap €1, whatever. It's very easy. The gate opens, you go. Park in a parking garage, it's the same thing. You just, as you're exiting the garage, you just tap to pay, and it's very quick, and it keeps things flowing. And I guess like I realized the power of NFC, but I hadn't really, like, I don't know, it hadn't hit me as much as it did just being here over the past few weeks, that like, wow, this thing is just like reduced so much friction in just day-to-day living. It's just so easy. And that kind of got me thinking, like, again, it's NFC implemented on our OS devices that allow us through these, like Apple Pay wallets, for example, to do these things, or just even through the credit cards. I look at NFC as basically facilitating security and trust for close distance transactions, because I have to have something with me. I need to be physically there, and I need to actually like interact with something. But you just trust that it works. Like if I'm at a parking garage or going through a toll booth, like I never think that something wrong is going to happen. It just works. It's easy, and I trust it. So that got me thinking, if NFC really facilitates security and trust for close distance, do protocols like DIDCOM, are the objective of these to then create trust for further distance or longer distance? Would you say that's one of the main goals of DIDCOM, to bring trust from a distance?
Absolutely. In fact, you said it perfectly. Your analogy of the kind of facilitation of trust at NFC because of the proximity, it's a fantastic analogy. In fact, I'm going to start using that. I will attribute it to Mathieu, because I will say, oh yeah, what the kind of trust that you could have in like a Google Pay or Apple Pay transaction, a contactless transaction with your phone, is exactly what the combination of point out of digital wallet, digital agent, and a protocol like DIDCOM can provide now at distance and at scale, right? If we could do the same thing with essentially, I mean, and literally imagine being able to do what feels like Apple Pay with any, any website, any kind of transaction you're doing remotely. And I not only hear you, but having spent 5 weeks in Europe at the over about a month and a half ago, and switched over from using a credit card in person in the US is still sort of the de facto, to 99% of the transactions were contactless. In my case, Apple Pay. I too was just like, this is absolutely what has to happen, and it totally does. And of course, you are using a wallet every time you do that. It's just that that's the payment function of a wallet versus the identity function of a wallet. And I'm not telling anyone anything new. Those two are absolutely coming together. In fact, in the Open Wallet Foundation, they've explicitly said identity, payment, and the third category is utility, meaning your hotel key, your car key, whatever you might need electronic key for, just to unlock it, not necessarily pay for it or prove anything to it. All of those are in scope, and I believe that's really the definition of those are the three things you want a digital wallet to do, and you'll be using, countless times a day in our digital lives here soon.
What does DIDCOM do better than other protocols or mechanisms of exchanging data? And one topic that comes up a lot is the OpenID topic, and there's a lot of infrastructure that uses it already. There's a lot of push and political push behind it, but maybe we started the conversation today just kind of contrasting wallets and agents. How would you contrast something like DIDCOM and OpenID, or perhaps other protocols, just to differentiate? Because I'm personally, I sometimes don't understand why there's so much tribalism between the different protocols or things. Like if you look on the internet today, there's tons of protocols and things mashed together to make it work, and I believe the same is going to be true in digital identity. And some of these different standards or protocols are better for certain use cases over others. So I would be interested from your perspective to maybe go a bit deeper into DIDCOM, but maybe contrast it against other stuff like OpenID. And I don't know if you share the same opinion as me, but it would be interesting to hear how you look at these things together or differently, or however you do.
Oh, that's a really good one. We could spend the whole rest of the podcast on that one, but I'll try and keep my answer as crisp as I can. The perspective, first, the overall perspective I'll bring on that is the one that's the reason I've been a steering member of Trust over IP since it started about 18 months ago. Excuse me, 20. No, that would be
I think it's close to 2 years.
Yeah, no, it's a little over. It's getting close to 2.5 years now. That's what I meant.
Wow.
And that in one sentence, the whole reason we started Trust over IP is we said we need a protocol stack for digital trust that is the sort of the direct analogy or analog of the TCP/IP protocol stack for data sharing, for global network interoperability at the data packet level. It's very widely recognized that the architecture for the internet did not put, you know, trust into scope. It was not something, it was just too hard of a problem for what they had to solve back at that time. And B, it was not a pressing problem because that was not anticipated. Just they didn't anticipate it was going to grow into the kind of global network where, you know, not everyone knew everyone. So so it's understandable that it wasn't tackled there, but now, you know, our feeling is we need a protocol stack that can do exactly what you just described, trust at a distance, right? It was literally John Jordan, who's the executive director of the Digital Trust Services in the province of British Columbia in Canada, who coined the term trust over IP. We need to be able to do trust over, you know, the IP protocol over a network the same way. He really named that for voice over IP, right? The same way we said, oh, we can take specialized networks that were designed just to do voice alone, like, you know, the POTS network, plain old telephone network, and now we can adapt it to a data network and do it just, you know, at scale and then more securely, and many other things that come from turning a protocol to digital. So anyway, my perspective on this is coming from the work we're doing on the Trust over IP protocol stack. Good news coming up here. Our goal at what we call the Technology Architecture Task Force, whose meeting, weekly meetings are on Thursdays. We just had one this morning, is to release the first public review draft of the Trust over IP Technology Architecture spec at Internet Identity Workshop coming up here in 3 weeks. So we, you know, this is really, you know, hot off the presses. We've been working on this for quite a while. And now to answer your question about the difference between a protocol like DIDCOM and a protocol like OpenID, which I want to clarify, there's been a number of evolutionary steps. I was one of the original board members at OpenID when we were working on, at that time, really OpenID 2, because OpenID 1 was from was a single design that there were, you know, around this idea of, hey, user-centric identity, you could own your own URL. There were actually three other approaches to that, and all four of us came together to say, okay, OpenID is the best name of the four. Let's adopt that and let's get our architectures together, and that became OpenID 2.0. And then that grew for a while, and then it hit a wall, and you know, the large social networks and social login was coming on. So we had to evolve the whole thing into an OAuth-based protocol, what's now known as OpenID Connect. That's now received very wide-scale adoption. But along came verifiable credentials and digital wallets. OpenID is a federation protocol, right? You talk to an identity provider as a server, and the relying party that you're talking to connects, and you're redirected to talk to that party. It's based on the, you know, classic identity federation architectures that we've had several generations of protocols for. When we move to digital wallets and digital credentials, we go to a different architecture, right? And what's happened is the OpenID Foundation said, we need to figure out now with digital wallets, digital credentials, how we are going to adapt the OpenID protocol to speak those, and that is the new OpenID for VC para protocols for issuing and for presenting a digital credential. And I think I know the two leads of that, Christina Yasuda from Microsoft and Torsten Latterstadt from yes.com, and the whole work at OpenID. I think they've really done really good work on those protocols. I recommend the white paper they put out about them and the specs. And I think they're going to be widely adopted. I know they're sort of one of the key elements that I think the EU Digital Identity Wallet is counting on in terms of an exchange protocol for verifiable credentials. Okay, so the summary answer I give you is the key difference between a protocol like that's designed specifically to solve call it an identification and authentication problem using either a federation architecture, or now going into a credential exchange, versus a protocol designed to say, oh, we need a trust layer. We need a standard way for any two endpoints to establish trust between them, and then build on that trust with higher level protocols. That's the design from which that's the design paradigm, design goals for DIDCOM. I'm not saying DIDCOM's the only protocol stack that did that. There are others. I often refer to the carry stack. Similarly, but they started from literally solving a different problem, which is how do two endpoints connect, establish trust, and then be able to proceed with other protocols that build on that base protocol, which I will give a generic name to. We call it a trust spanning protocol. And with the trust ORP stack, it follows an hourglass model, just like the TCP/IP stack. And that means there's a single protocol at the center of the hourglass that is how you get the interoperability between the supporting protocols and the higher level protocols. With the TCP/IP stack, that protocol is the IP protocol, and that's how you get the addressing, and any two IP addressable devices can connect. And then they move up to higher level protocols like SMTP for email or HTTP for web. If we do the same thing for trust, or for a universal trust infrastructure, we need that trust spanning protocol that establishes a cryptographically secure connection between those two endpoints, any two endpoints, right? It doesn't matter what kind of device, just like with the internet, it doesn't matter whether you're a mobile phone or you're a server or you're a blockchain, you're still connecting with an IP address. Well, with the trust spanning protocol, we believe the thing you need to connect to is most broadly called a verifiable identifier. And I use that term because a decentralized identifier is one type of verifiable identifier. And there are subcategories of decentralized identifiers that can get you progressively, call it stronger trust or characteristics. But they're also, even though folks know that I'm a DID nut, have been for a long time, there are other forms of verifiable identifiers, meaning you can cryptographically verify control of that identifier, and they exist now. An HTTPS endpoint, a server you connect to on the internet that can show you an SSL or TLS certificate, is a verifiable identifier of a kind. And we don't think those should be excluded. So I know I'm giving a long answer, but you asked a really hard question. The protocols that are designed to say, we're generically going to just solve the problem of connecting to endpoints that have verifiable identifiers in a peer-to-peer fashion is quite a different architecture than a protocol designed to say, oh, we're going to solve a client-to-server authentication, identification authentication challenge. So the OpenID family of protocols that were designed to do that, a specialized family of protocols, they should work within a more generic infrastructure. But DIDCOM, as an example of, and the name, by the way, did to did, right? Did to did communications. That was the whole origin of it. That solves a much more generic and universal problem. And to contrast, the Hyperledger Aries community said, oh, well, if we need to exchange both issue and present verifiable credentials, we'll start with DIDCOM and we'll build what they call co-protocols on top of that to say, all right, well, now the specific thing we need to exchange once we've established that connection is issuance or presentation of verifiable credential. Those became the Aries protocols. So if you look at what OpenID for VC protocols do and what the Aries credential exchange protocols do, they're not that different, right? They ultimately accomplish the same goal. But with the Aries protocols, the DIDCOM substrate can be a substrate for many other trusted exchange protocols, payment, data sharing. There's just all kinds of other kinds of what we call trust tasks at Trust over IP that can be built on top of that base layer, which the OpenID as a specialized protocol was never designed to do those other things. Secure chat, just all those other kinds of tasks that you'd want a common trust spanning protocol to be the basis for. That was a much longer answer than you probably wanted, but you asked a really hard question.
In your answer, is it that in the hourglass of trust, you describe the hourglass of TCP/IP, where IP kind of sits at the center, and then there's protocols that work on top or below, on top of it, you can mix and match. Is that kind of the same thing, being whether it's DIDCOM or carry or one of these, just very general protocols that allows to establish trust between a client and a client? That needs to be at the center, because then you'll have more specialized stuff like a client to server, like using OpenID for VC, that would leverage DIDCOM, but it would add some level of federation on top of it. Am I butchering that?
Yes.
Or
No, you're not butchering. You're exactly right. The general principle of the hourglass design for protocol stacks, and I'm going to put an advertisement in for the Trust over IP published something called the design principles for the Trust over IP stack. We spent about 9 months on what ended up being 17 design principles before we tackled the job of saying, okay, now let's apply those to come out with Trust over IP architecture. And among those, I'd say the end-to-end principle, which is the basic principle of the internet, that any two endpoints should be able to connect. That and the hourglass principle of that hourglass shape of the protocol stack with the one spanning protocol in the middle. Those are the two primary design principles that inform the structure. And what's below that that neck of the hourglass are called supporting protocols. What's above it are called supported protocols. And with the internet, the supporting protocols below IP are all the protocols used to move bits around on a specific network, like Ethernet. But above it are all of the internet, above the IP layer, you got TCP and UDP, you've got HTTP and SMTP and all the other higher level protocols that get more specific and specialized. What we're doing is we're applying that same model, that same hourglass model, and saying we need one trust spanning protocol that just solves that problem of the establishing. We don't actually use the word secure. It's an authentic connection that where both parties can authenticate that the identifier that they're talking to on the other end, right? And that identifier, by the way, this is really a critical point. All you're authenticating with the trust spanning protocol is that you are talking to the party controlling that other identifier. You're not. That's not in any way, for instance, where you and I, Mathieu, that it's Mathieu Glaude, right? Or it's Drummond Reed. All it would be is that my did and your did are the two that are, actually talking over this, right? So what it does is it separates the problem of, okay, we've got a cryptographically verifiable connection now. Standard way to do that, any two devices. Now, how do they go to a higher level of trust? Well, if we'd never met each other before, I might go, well, Mathieu, can you show me a verifiable credential or two or three or whatever, right? Or can you prove to me that you know someone else I know, right? All kinds of different kinds of what we call trust tasks can now be accomplished on that really basic, on what we've established, that basically secure, authentic connection between the two of our DIDs, wallets, and agents, right? Now they've got that verified connection, and we can build the higher levels of trust. And of course, you can see, oh, well, that's two people, but what about a person to a website, a bank, a shopping site, an auction site? How about a person to their car, to their refrigerator, right? To their, to whatever. So It's not specific to people. It's not specific to organizations or devices. It's the same, just like IP protocol works everywhere. We believe the trust over IP spanning layer protocol needs to work everywhere.
I always thought that the trust over IP dual stack, the 4 layers, dual stack being the technology and governance applied more broadly than just in identity credentials. It was kind of just the first use case for it, and you need a use case to start building things around, or else
Definitely.
you're not solving any problems. And Daniel Hardman had given a presentation at a Trust over IP All members probably a year ago, talking about how he saw the trust over IP stack being applied to money, basically, just as he was looking more into central bank digital currencies. He saw how the same framework applied quite nicely to the use case of digital currencies. With all of the craziness happening in social media, that is another use case for it, where I think, and you're seeing new advancements happening now through companies like Block in particular, where there's a vision to make the base of social media just more of a protocol. And I kind of thinking that, you know what, like the trust over IP stack is probably a good solution for that too. How, first of all, is that accurate? And second of all, like how widely known is this in different verticals like social media or like payments? Is this being looked at right now as, hey, these 4 layers, however I fill these layers up, are a good framework for my particular use case?
So the answer is yes, it's absolutely accurate, totally right on. And B, it is almost not known at all, in part because Trust over IP Foundation hasn't, put a deliverable out there saying, here's the architecture for the stack, and here is, in fact, how general it is and how many different kinds of trust tasks it can be applied to. That's why we're trying to get, now the technical architecture spec out. And I will be holding, we just discussed it this morning, there'll be a number of us from Trust over IP there at IAW coming up in a couple of weeks. And I will absolutely be calling a session on the trust spanning layer protocol and the trust task that can be built above it. And in fact, I will be wanting, let me make this point, Matthew, that a trust spanning protocol that meets the requirements that we have, and you'll see them in the doc right now, the 30 requirements that we identify, architectural requirements for the trust over IP stack, divided across the 4 layers. Interestingly enough, I think it's roughly 70% of those requirements apply to layer 2, the trust spanning protocol. That's the hero. That's the essence of the story. I don't believe, sitting here today, that any one protocol that has been developed actually meets all those requirements today. Probably DIDCOM is probably the closest, but I've had some in-depth discussions with Daniel Hardman, and it doesn't actually necessarily meet all of them. Or you could also say it may meet all of them, but be thicker and heavier than it needs to be. And what you want is the trust spanning layer, or any spanning layer on a stack, to be as thin as you can make it, but no thinner, because then it will last, it'll have the longest lifetime. It'll be the most useful in general. And that's what you need from the spanning layer. So the session, I'm going to call it IAW, and I hope you will be there. Are you going to be at IAW?
I will try. Good.
If it's possible. It's going to be to basically, invite Daniel and Sam Kerr and all the Steve McCown, the DIDCOM folks, Sam Smith and Phil Fairheiler, Kevin Griffin, I'll call it the carry stack folks, but also Daniel Buckner and the DWN, decentralized web node folks. All of them have candidates for that. All of them have good, powerful pieces of of the stack and contributions to that spanning layer protocol. And so since you're asking me about it, I really want to see that convergence, because I will, put it on record here. As soon as we have that convergence and applications, and implementations of that protocol start to move out, I think we will start the same kind of network effect that grew the internet, right? We will that trust layer will begin to emerge in a way that we've only, been able to sort of poke at and get started on, but it will really take off.
One of the other things that has crossed my mind, I guess, over the past couple of years as we've built, let's just call them SSI products, and just thinking about how you would design the user experience around these products. One of the, I guess, comparing apps that we looked at were email, like email applications. And email uses all sorts of different protocols, post office protocol, IMAP, Internet Message Access Protocol, SMTP, we named a few already today. Which means that any email client that supports these protocols basically could be used to send emails, which is why if you're using Outlook and I'm using Gmail, or name your client, we could send emails, we could send files to each other, we could do all sorts of things like that. So I drew some similarities there between email and SSI. One of the other things is that email is an asynchronous productivity tool. I look at digital wallets kind of as the same thing. Then the third thing, just thinking about how you get the network effects, and that's why I'm kind of going down the line of email, because email obviously got the network effect at some point. Email is not always used directly in systems. It's used sometimes to get alerts for processes that are happening. Like often if there are line of business applications being used, email is kind of something that's complementary to that, to inform you of stuff that's happening, to make you go and do something. Or maybe it's information is exchanged via email before actually going and executing something in a line of business application. So to summarize, both SSI and emails use different protocols. Any client could exchange data with any other client. They're both asynchronous. And I don't think they will both replace line of business systems for everything. Having been in the standard space for as long as you've been, do you think there are some key learnings that could be taken from email and just understanding how email started gaining adoption? Are there parallels that we could look at between these two, considering that there are quite a few similarities?
If I'm properly track the number of questions, the answer is yes, 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 and yes. I love the analogy with email. I believe it's deeply and profoundly true. Email is the default, call it human to human, but also in many cases, not all cases, many cases, even machine to machine, communications, at a message level versus a packet level, the packet level that TCP/IP or the IP protocol, handles. And there's so many ways. There's a brilliant paper. I'm trying to remember. I know Phil Windley has the link to it. That I think there was a group at HP. Alan, I'm trying to remember his name. He's a regular at IW. But anyway, they wrote and they basically compared all the other sort of types of collaboration tools that have evolved out there, against email and sort of a feature matrix. And it was stunning to see how useful and general and adaptable email is compared to all those other tools. None of them even came close to doing all the things that email does, just because it is basically a simple and general. I remember when the MIME type extensions were finally standardized and the email clients caught on, and now you can basically move around any kind of a file. and all of the things that could then that could then be built on top of that, right? And you went from the early email clients. I was a Eudora user at one time. I loved Eudora, but Eudora would look like a dinosaur compared to things like Gmail and Outlook today, right? So I love that analogy. You're absolutely right, and there are those call it over on the far edge that believe that the protocol stack we're trying to develop with Trust over IP and what will become the trust spanning protocol and the protocols on top of that will over time, I'm talking 40 or 50 years, replace SMTP, because it has not been possible so far to really solve the trust and security problems with SMTP as a protocol for just those similar reasons. But if you start with something that actually always establishes an authentic connection for any kind of exchange, then we can have that basis. And then whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, I mean, one of the cool things about DIGCOM, for example, is you can do asynchronous communications, but you can also do real-time chat, right? And I don't know about you, I love the fact that I can use email everywhere. Show me the secure chat that I can use everywhere. It's driving me nuts right now. I think I have 9 different ways to communicate securely with someone, but I have to fall back to email to say, by the way, how are we going to do that?
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.